I tend to think of Italians as great physicists. Here out at Fermilab, we have a lot of Fermilab, Enrico Fermi. We think of the Italians as producing fabulous physicists, but in turn, what are you shaking your head?
Not me.
No, I mean, okay, but you're a fabulous science communicator. You're a fabulous neuroscientist. Matteo Farinella, who was a new friend who I met at the Graphic Medicine Conference. We're being joined by some of our good little buddies down here, who I recently met. And he's the author of Neurocomic, a very, I would probably say, the most famous science, neuroscience-based comic ever.
Probably, yeah. There aren't many.
Well, okay, but so yours it's not much competition, but you win anyway. But you are also the proprietor of Comic Science, the Comic Science website and Comic Science Facebook page, and you are currently a postdoctoral researcher at Columbia University. I believe not too shabby. And what we would, and I do, there are a number of things I wanted to chat with you about, but I'm very interested right now in the work that you are doing. So, we are being joined by our good buddy Nick Gross, who is a professor of physics at Boston University. Hi, Nick. We love you very much. And Nick is a good person to think about to add to this conversation. So, well, Matteo, tell us what it is you are working on right now.
Yeah. So essentially, as you mentioned, my background is in neuroscience, but then I published this graphic novel, that toward the end of my PhD. And it was very successful. So that's what I've been doing actually for the past few years, just drawing comics about neuroscience and science in general. And now my position at Columbia, I'm trying to study the effects of comics. So the intuition is that comics would improve engagement with science. It would be good for science communication, but there aren't many studies trying to measure this. So that's what I've been trying to do recently.
And and that, as I mentioned, that would seem, so you want to find out whether or not comics, how they compare as means of science communication and science education with text.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, either text or other forms, or like infographics, other visualization forms. I'm kind of working on many different fronts. I'm trying to really understand. I'm not trying to prove that comics are better than everything else. I'm trying to understand specifically what topics and for what audiences comics could be more effective, so that then we can maybe use them more intelligently and like just write specific comics for specific audiences in a more scientific.
And so my initial thought when you said that was, well, this is pretty straightforward. You do you take your subjects, your N of 30, and you test them on their knowledge of a particular subject, let's say physics or nursing, and then you get 15 of them, you give them a paragraph to read, and then you give the other 15 a comic, one of your fine comics, give them neurocomics, and we want to do it on neuroscience, and then you test them all later. That would seem to be fairly straightforward,
right? Yeah.
Wait, I'm sorry, we made a mistake. All together now, Santiago Ramon y Cajal.
Cajal, one of my heroes.
We have to say that name. But anyway, though, it's that would seem to test the effectiveness versus other media would seem straightforward A/B stuff, but it's not that simple.
Yeah, in theory it is simple, and that's why I kind of went into it very optimistic. I was going to be the one just simply proving that comics are effective. But I think the complication is that some similar studies have been done, for example, in graphic medicine that you already mentioned. So in that case, there's usually like a very clear goal. So it's like, the patient understanding the instructions, the informed consent. So in that case, there is something kind of straightforward to measure. So for example, how well they understand this medical information. And it has been shown that comics do improve understanding. But what I'm trying to do is it's not necessarily studying learning per se, so like knowledge acquisition, because I actually, from the little we know, I don't think comics will necessarily improve understanding. Like if someone has to read about science, they can read a text article about science, and that's fine. But what I'm really hoping to show and what I'm trying to measure is more fuzzy measures like engagement and interest. So if you read the same article about science in comic or text format, are you more likely to want to read more, for example, if it's in a comic format? Or you think, or you would rate it as more interesting if it's in a comic format? That's where I really hope that comics can benefit science communication. So not really learning per se, but engaging the audience. That's what I'm really passionate about.
So I think you're saying that it's challenging to design the study that would test ongoing engagement and interest, and whether or not comics promote that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, first of all, yeah, it's difficult. I'm doing everything with online questionnaires, so it's kind of difficult to know how much are people actually engaged. And also, yeah, these are very difficult measures to put a number on, like how much people care about a subject. And then there are many subjects in science, so maybe something works for biology but doesn't work quite well for physics. And there are different type of comics with narrator, without narrator. So yeah, I'm more confused than when I started, essentially.
We have a question from our good buddy Nick Gross, who's actually an improv science guy. So he's a physicist who is looking into and playing with using improvisational scenes. But so what kinds of audiences are you thinking about?
That's a good question. So yeah, the moment I'm studying just general adult audiences. So as I said, I'm doing everything online, and the reason is partly because as a first step is kind of easier to access, but also because I feel like comics have often been presented as something for children, and there are some studies about comics in the classroom. But I really believe that comics can be a useful way to reach everyone, especially adults that they don't necessarily read the New York Times article about science, or they don't go to the science museum. So those are the people we are really kind of failing as science communicators. And I hope that comics could be a new format that maybe is more engaging for them.
So this is a Chicago Brain Buddies. We are, of course, it's sponsored by the Chicago Society for Neuroscience. But neuroscience is really not your main goal. Your main goal these days, as I understand it, is science communication.
Yeah. That's I always make it very clear. That's my main interest. So, I mean, I have a background in neuroscience, and I am in this Society and Neuroscience program. But the way I'm using neuroscience is more in terms of psychology, cognitive science. So, trying to think what mechanism comics can exploit when it comes to science communication and public engagement. So I'm not necessarily studying comics about the brain. I'm using neuroscience to understand how comics work.
So what mechanism? So first of all, you care about communicating science across the spectrum of sciences.
Yes, definitely.
To what end? What is in it for me? Why do I
we're going to ask this question.
Yes, I know. Okay, why do I need to? Most of us have lived our entire lives without ever thinking about the top quark.
Yeah.
20 years ago, all of a sudden, the top quark or the Higgs boson. Why
Definitely.
do I need?
I know, and I don't have a good answer actually, and that's the main difference. I think also compared to, for example, graphic medicine. Like medicine is something we will all have experience of sooner or later, unfortunately. And so that's something people naturally care about. They want to learn more about some diseases or conditions they have. When it comes to science, so I mean, again, it's a broad spectrum. There are some sciences, some fields in science that are very relevant to our everyday life. And so that's probably should be in a way easier to communicate and to get people to care about them. But then there are other sciences which are very difficult for people to relate to because they are very abstract and far away. And then the question is where it's a reasonable question. Should people even read about this stuff? Should they care about? I am a scientist, so I'm biased, and I think science is really fascinating, even when it doesn't directly apply to our life, and it can teach us something about. As we were discussing earlier, I think it's more a way of thinking about the world. So going beyond appearances and like thinking that there is always like something behind and something more complex that it may appear at first. And so yeah, even if the specific concept of the science maybe is not the most relevant, I think there's something to be gained from reading about science and scientists and science as a process more than like a list of facts.
Now, to go back to one of the things you mentioned about the differences between learning graphically and learning textually, make one to know, do we know about different neural pathways?
I wish.
Well, okay, yeah. So certainly there's a difference in the visual activation. Those areas that involve the visualization are clearly more engaged, or even involved in seeing it, I should say, and in perceiving colors, obviously, are much more engaged. But there's not been any specific research.
Yeah, we are still very far from that. I would love to know. This is even more complex to study. I mean, of course, the visual aspect is believed to be very engaging, but also I think comics in a way like go beyond visual. So comics could activate other things, like maybe more like empathic regions, because like there's this theory that when we read a comic, it's much easier to identify with the character because we see this character is like it's this sort of puppet that readers can identify with. This is a kind of classic theory of Scott McCloud, that comics are more universal, because compare, for example, to a video where like there is only one very specific guy that is talking. So like maybe people.
I just can't stand that when you all get.
I know, it's so annoying.
So I've seen old darkies on the screen with just one guy blathering on. I don't know.
I mean, again, we don't know, but an idea that comic could kind of bypass that mechanism. So like, if a story told by in a comic format is somehow more universal than just another white guy lecturing on YouTube, and so a wider range of people could care and identify with that science.
Right, and so you were saying,
yeah. Sorry, I just want to also make clear, like, this has not been proved. It's just all like theories about how comics work.
And so you have this theory, and you will try to prove it, and you will try.
It's Scott McCloud theory. I would like to like study or prove it in a way.
Okay, but I guess my point, one quick question. I do want to get it on, but you want to believe that comics are useful. So, but this is a really, really, really important thing, right? Because you have an admitted bias.
Yeah, totally.
So how is it that you are going to? What science can you apply to diminish the effects of your admitted bias? You're on the internet now. We all know you're biased now. Your activity as a scientist.
I'm probably the worst person to study this. But no one else wants to do it. But no, yeah, I mean, I guess, but that's where the science comes in. So far, there's been a lot of like theory about comics and speculations about why comics can be useful, and a lot of like qualitative studies, but there isn't very much in terms of quantitative studies. So I'm trying to work on both fronts, and I'm arguing about the effectiveness of comics, but I'm also trying to put a number on it. So, and I mean, the most obvious way to do it is having a control, which hasn't been done very often with comics. So exactly the same information is presented either in comic format or text format, and ideally, each participant gets a version of each, like 2 stories, one in comic, one in text, and then you compare and see if there's an actual difference between the 2 groups.
Now, but you are in a unique position to assess the effect of comics because you made one.
Yeah.
Your comic, NeuroMOOC, has been out there for a while, so I'm curious, when you have traveled around and met people who've read the very excellent comic, NeuroComic, I think I may have said NeuroMOOC because that's Peggy Mason, but NeuroComic is yours that you collaborated with. But what do people most commonly say to you that they got out of NeuroComic?
Yeah, I mean, you would think I'm in an advanced position because, again, like I have this experience, but I actually don't know what worked. That's really kind of why I'm doing this project, because like I can see the kind of like empirical, no, sorry, not empirical, anecdotal evidence that people like these comics and they're more likely to read about neuroscience in this format. But I don't know why. I really want to go like down to the mechanism.
Well,
I think people say the story, I guess, like, yeah, the story is a big component. So the narrative element that a comic has compared to like traditional.
Well, I often say that the holy grail of science communication is story.
Yeah.
You want to tell a thumping good story.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I totally think that's a key element. And again, this is nothing new. Yeah, this, as you say, something science communicators and writers and actors know very well. When it comes to comic, again, like it hasn't really been studied. And I think an advantage that the comics have is that they can make up stories when there is none, essentially. Especially if you're talking about science, I mean, it's easy to have a story when there is like a patient, like a personal, intimate story of
someone gets sick, someone gets
like,
better.
We can all relate to that. I mean, assuming we are like decent human beings, like we naturally care about humans and we can relate to humans. But as you asked, why should we care about physics particles or like distant galaxies? Like there is no human emotional connection there. But comics can just make up a character and just like throw it in that science domain. That's what I did with neurocomics. So neurocomic, the very basic narrative device is to have a character that is transported inside the brain and goes on this sort of journey through different parts of the brains and has to learn about the brain along the way. And the idea was that this character would provide, again, someone for the reader to relate to and identify.
Now Nick mentions Galileo's dialogue.
Exactly, yeah, another classic example. Yeah, I feel like this has been done over and over in science, to the idea of having a conversation or having, like, adding these fictional characters that talk about a specific scientific topic, which I think I would guess is much more engaging than just reading a list of facts.
Now, let me say that once again, I'm talking with Matteo Farinella, who is the proprietor of Cartoon Science, the website and the Facebook page Cartoon Science. We suggest that you head on over there. If you're a browser, open a new tab right now, and as we are talking, you can check out Cartoon Science, either the website Cartoon Science or the Facebook page Cartoon Science. But you're a scientist, so we talk about why anyone should give two hoots about science.
Yeah.
So people like you, and I would say people like me, find this trying to understand nature an endless experience of wonder and amazement. Yeah. That certainly our buddy Nick will certainly say that, well, it's true of all of it, but certainly physics has all manner of things that just kind of make you go boosh. And neuroscience and all of biology. My wife and I are endlessly. My wife and I actually sit around and wonder at videos of ATP synthase. An enzyme-based marriage.
But doesn't everybody?
Of course, everybody does. Obviously, that's the case. But I guess what I was saying is that as we think about why anyone should learn, should care at all about science, because I haven't learned anything. I just study a lot. But around every bend, the turn of every bend, around with every new, even theory is an opportunity for wonder and amazement, which I would also posit tend to be pro-social emotions. That when something is amazing, what they say is, when you're in love, you want the whole world to see. When you are amazed, you want to go, look at that! Did you see that there? Look at that there!
Yeah. I think definitely like appreciating the complexity. I mean, at least for me, it's very rewarding and very positive, and it makes you wonder like what else we don't know, and like really like take things less for granted and appreciate more just like small things in life. But yeah, I mean, another answer I have to that is like, again, I think is at least the way I try to communicate science, or I hope I am, communicating science is more than just a list of facts. So it's not just like, this is how something works and you should know because I tell you so. I think it's more about really trying to trigger curiosity and wonder, as you were saying. So like, as well as talking about the things we know, in neurocomic, for example, we talk about a lot of the things we don't know, which like neuroscience is like way more than what we know. And so like, and that's kind of, for me, exciting and really like, I hope it inspires the reader to go and look for more information and like ask their own questions and also like, maybe also challenge my own information. So like always second guess everything and find their own answers and look for their own information.
As Luani points out, that with study, as we study, we are placed in the position of children because we are confronted with a world that is virtually incomprehensible. It's certainly, as you say, the people who really study these things deeply are even more astonished and more like, oh no.
Yeah, true. It's a big part of being a scientist, I feel.
It's only the people who don't know anything that figure we got it all figured out. People like me, like, oh, I understand these things. But the real scientists are like, no idea what is going on.
Yeah, most days I don't know what I'm doing. But again, I feel like being a scientist, that's the main difference. And that's what I'm trying to, I think, communicate and spread, is like this also feeling of being comfortable with the fact that I don't know, but let's find out. Let's figure out how to find the answers. Instead, I feel like the sort of the default attitude is like, either you know or you don't know, and if you don't know, you just have to give up or trust whoever position of power, of authority. And like, I don't like that. I think it's really empowering for people to accept that they don't know, admit it, and then but instead of giving up, just go and look for information or like figuring out ways of finding an answer. That's what scientists do, essentially. That's what experiments are. We have a question and we try to think about the best way to find the answer. And that's really what I want to communicate.
Well, now, Luani has another point, that science is stigmatized, that the Gen Xers were taught that science was, that it was something. And I'm going to say that we tend to do a little bit of this at Chicago Council on Science and Technology, to promote the idea that science is a thing that is delivered to you by the PhDs.
Yeah, this idea that like either you are good at science or you're not, and I think it's definitely sort of reinforced from early on in our education system. And I really hate that. I feel like people, when they meet you and you have a PhD, they think you're so smart. I really don't feel that smart. It's more it's more about like being comfortable again with like not knowing things and just developing critical thinking, and even the stuff like always be ready and open to change your mind if new evidence comes up.
That is what you just, those two things: being comfortable with not knowing and being ready to change your mind. Give me some particle physics, okay? I'll take some neuroscience. Don't ask me to be ready to change my mind, and don't ask me to accept uncertainty. Look, you know this, that the fundamental human psychological activity is to reduce our uncertainty.
Yes, we really don't like.
Okay, all right. So then, but you want us to think like scientists. So how do you?
In a way, I do.
Well, Dr. Farinella, please tell me how it is that you are going to diminish my hatred of uncertainty and make me suddenly so scientifically mellow with not knowing anything. I hate not knowing.
Everyone hates it, I think, even scientists, even if they don't admit it. But that's really the hard challenge. That's like kind of what I mean, going beyond comics and neuroscience. Like that's, I think, what really the big challenge of science communication. That's where we are really failing, right? Like we often talk to people that kind of already agree with us, and so, but how do we reach the people that they don't want to know and they already know they disagree with us and they don't even want to read our article or our comics? I mean, I hope comics maybe are more likely to be to pick them up. But yeah,
the thing is, you
make
fail at it a whole lot.
I know. I don't have a good answer, but I think again it goes back to the idea of like telling stories. So instead of just presenting the science as like a list of things we know or we don't know, really go through the process. Like, how did people figure this thing out? And also, yeah, something we don't talk about very often in science is about the history of science and like the times we got things wrong, and how we corrected them. And that's fine. That's part of science. But we tend to edit that a lot out. So like just give the final accepted version and don't talk about like all the missteps along the way. But I think that's not right. That's not how science works, and that's kind of reinforced the idea that most people have of science, that either you know the answer or you don't, and you shouldn't even try. I think it's really important to tell the story of the discovery and make it as exciting as possible, and hopefully people what they will take away is that the process is pleasurable. They enjoy the journey and the process of discovery more than like the final answer.
So we have to learn to love being wrong, love being proven wrong, love being publicly humiliated.
It's so good. Just embrace it. Yeah.
All right. So now I'm not a scientist, but I am a sciencey optimist, and so we always like to wrap things up with some good news, a happy ending on all the shows. So let me ask you: you were in the science communication business. You have seen. We just spent the time together at the White River Junction in Vermont, but you've been studying science communication for a long time. So when you look out into the world of #SciComm, what do you see that people are getting right?
Okay, well, I mean, like sometimes like things that are inspiring and like motivating me. The first one, I mean, just because we mentioned it so many times already, but the graphic medicine conference and network that's provide a lot of motivation for me, because they're kind of like they're really leading the way in this idea of using comics for serious subjects and like and showing that they have an effect, and there is a need for this kind of informative comics. That's where we met, and I'm definitely gonna go back every year. What else are we getting right? I mean, in general, I think everything we've been talking about is like it's not really new. I feel like it's slowly becoming like kind of more mainstream in science communication, and people start to understand that we shouldn't just teach science as like sort of finished prepackaged version, but also tell the story of the science and talk about ourselves as scientists. I've been involved with this other group network, Massive Science, which is trying to get scientists themselves, massive science. I've been doing mostly illustrations for them, but I've really seen them grow, and they're essentially getting scientists themselves, mostly young scientists, PhDs and postdocs, to write about their own research, and they encourage them to write in a way that is not just, the scientific way we are trained in, so very impersonal, very cold, very objective, but also talk about our struggles and like our insecurities and our failures. And I think and people really respond to that. I feel like we should change a little bit the stereotype of scientists, and it's definitely
I would say that Matteo Farinella, you have certainly changed my stereotype of Italians as only being about physics.
That's good.
And also, I think your point is well taken, that our buddies at Graphic Medicine, of whom MK Zerwick, who is the one who's been with this part of this, MK Zerwick, one of the founders, and I forget what they changed their new structure, but she's even more of an official bigwig.
Yeah.
I just want to encourage all of our beloved siblings to head on over to Cartoon Science here on Facebook. Say hi to Matteo Farinella, and check out Cartoon Science on the web at cartoonscience.org.
Yeah. And that's not just my work. That's basically all science, comics, animation I can find. That's just a place to collect them.
All right. Well, Matteo, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you some more. We can chat with you again, and look forward to checking you out on Facebook and following your work.
Thank you, Aaron.
And thank you, beloved sibling. Thank you so much, Nick and Donna and Loani, as always. And thank you, MK and Sharon. And thank you guys for joining us. We will see you soon, as on the tomorrow, in fact, because Peggy will be here with the Chicago Brain Buddies. Until then, keep thinking.